The moment you saw the thumbnail of this video, a familiar definition of democracy probably flashed in your mind. Freedom of speech, the right to vote, the rule of the people. And maybe, with some reluctance, you felt like skipping, because you thought it's just the same old story repeated once again. But wait. I want to tell you something different. Something real. And maybe something that will even shock you. Democracy is one of the most overused words of our century. It is everywhere, on classroom walls, in political campaigns, even stamped onto the flags of nations. But behind this word, there is a hidden truth. Do we actually know what democracy is? Or are we just recycling a shallow and distorted image of it? Let's ask a few simple questions. Did you know that in the very place democracy was born, ancient Athens, the people meant only a small circle of male citizens, while women, slaves, and foreigners had no voice at all? Did you know that the greatest philosophers of that era, like Plato, considered democracy not a virtue, but a degeneration of politics? And did you know that what we today call representative democracy would not even have counted as democracy to the Greeks? So stay with me. Because in this video, I want us to look at democracy again, not as a slogan, not as a classroom cliché, but as it really was, and as it has been emptied of meaning under the weight of power and propaganda today. Part 2. The historical roots and the modern distortion. Democracy, a word built from two parts in ancient Greek, demos meaning the people and kratos meaning power. The translation seems simple, the power of the people, but the history of this word and the reality hidden inside it is anything but simple. When we look at ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy, we find a truth that is often forgotten. The people in that context never meant everyone. Women were excluded. Slaves were excluded. Foreigners were excluded. Only a narrow circle of free male citizens had the right to gather in the assembly and decide the fate of the city. From the very beginning, democracy was not universal participation, but a limited form of power carrying the name of the people. Yet there was one striking difference: that democracy was direct. Citizens who qualified gathered in the agora, the public square, to decide on war, taxation, laws, and justice. There were no intermediaries, no representatives standing between them and power. It was a raw experience of decision-making, something that almost no society today can claim to have. Modern democracy, the system we live under now, took a very different path. Instead of direct participation, it became what we call representative democracy. In this system, the role of the people is reduced to choosing representatives, who then remain in power to make decisions on their behalf. In appearance, power belongs to the people. In practice, power remains concentrated in the hands of a small minority. And here is where the hidden similarities between ancient and modern democracy emerge. In Athens, only a select class could rule. Today, although in theory anyone can enter politics, the reality is harsher. Candidacy may be legally open, but in practice it requires enormous resources, vast wealth, access to powerful media, and most importantly, alignment with the structures of power. Someone outside these networks, even with millions of supporters, rarely makes it far. This is only one example. Another lies in the myth of free speech. Many assume democracy guarantees absolute freedom of expression. But in reality, freedom is always conditional. Conditional on laws, on economic interests, on political sensitivities. Just as in Athens only citizens could have a voice, today only those with access to platforms and influence are truly heard. Others, even when they speak, are drowned out in the noise of dominant powers. So when we look closely, modern democracy reveals itself as a continuation of the same old limits in a new disguise. The forms have changed, but the exclusions remain. In both cases, the people never meant everyone, It always meant those with access, status, and recognition. This raises a hard question. Are we truly living in the continuation of Athenian democracy? Or are we living in a completely new invention, one that carries the name of democracy to secure legitimacy, while hiding a very different reality? If we are honest, democracy as we know it today is less the heir of Athens, and more a carefully crafted creation of its own, one whose similarities are dangerous and whose differences are profound. Part 3. Philosophers on Democracy. Ancient Philosophers. 1. Plato. Plato was one of the fiercest critics of democracy. In the Republic, he ranked political systems from the most ideal, the rule of philosophers, to the most degenerate, tyranny. Democracy, in his view, stood just one step above tyranny. Why? Because in democracy everyone, regardless of virtue or knowledge, claimed the right to rule. Equality without wisdom, Plato argued, leads only to chaos. When every voice is given the same weight, decisions follow passions rather than reason. Such a state inevitably collapses into disorder, and from this disorder emerges tyranny. Looking at modern democracies, it is hard not to see the resemblance to Plato's prophecy. Systems that celebrate equality of rights, yet in practice are swayed by propaganda, emotional manipulation, and the dominance of those who master the psychology of the masses rather than the pursuit of virtue and wisdom. 2. Aristotle. Aristotle took a more balanced view. In politics, he distinguished between good forms of government, monarchy, aristocracy, and polity, and their corrupt counterparts, tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. For Aristotle, democracy was the deviant form of polity. The rule of the majority, poor who he feared, would govern in their own interest alone. He instead praised politia, a mixed constitution balancing the participation of the many with the guidance of the few. 3. The Stoics. The Stoics, Zeno, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, focused primarily on ethics and the harmony of the soul with nature. Yet their philosophy had deep political implications. To them, the value of a government did not rest in its name, but in its alignment with reason and natural law. They advanced the revolutionary idea of a cosmopolis, a universal city in which all human beings share equal membership. Unlike the Athenians, who restricted citizenship to a narrow group, the Stoics imagined humanity itself as a single political community. Still, they were not naive about democracy. They recognized that the crowd was often ruled by passions and error. For the Stoics, democracy was only worthwhile if it fostered virtue and reason. If it did not, then the mere claim of rule by the people carried no true value. Modern and contemporary philosophers. 1. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In The Social Contract, Rousseau declared, "True democracy never existed and never will exist." He believed democracy could only exist where people themselves, directly and collectively, made the laws. In large and complex societies, such direct democracy was impossible. Representation, to him, was already a betrayal. Once citizens handed their authority to representatives, the general will cease to exist. 2. Alexis de Tocqueville. In Democracy in America, Tocqueville admired the vitality of democratic life, especially in the United States, but also issued stern warnings. He celebrated equality, yet feared the tyranny of the majority. In democracy, he argued, the will of the majority could silence minorities and extinguish individuality. For Tocqueville, democracy was both the destiny of modern societies and a constant danger to liberty. 3. Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche regarded modern democracy as a symptom of decline. To him, it represented the triumph of the herd over the exceptional. Democracy leveled all distinctions, but in doing so, it suffocated greatness. In Nietzsche's eyes, democracy was not the victory of freedom, but the reign of mediocrity. A system where everyone becomes equal by being reduced to the lowest common denominator. 4. Karl Marx. Marx dismissed representative democracy as a mask for bourgeois rule. Elections and voting, he argued, did not empower the people but legitimized the economic dominance of the capitalist class. As long as inequality of wealth persisted, political equality was nothing more than an illusion. Democracy, for Marx, was a form of false consciousness, a system that makes the people believe they rule, while real power lies elsewhere. 5. Hannah Arendt. Arendt redefined democracy as the active presence of citizens in the public sphere. For her, politics was not about casting a vote every few years, but about acting together, speaking, and building a common world. If democracy becomes nothing more than an electoral ritual, she warned, it becomes hollow. True democracy, in Arendt's view, requires continuous, living participation. Without it, the word loses its substance. Conclusion. If we look at these philosophers and reflect, we see that democracy has never carried the simple meaning that most people assume today. For Plato, democracy was the prelude to tyranny, and modern democracies often resemble this vision more than they realize. For Aristotle, it needed to be restrained and balanced by aristocracy to endure. For the Stoics, its worth depended on whether it aligned with reason and the natural law of a shared humanity. Rousseau saw it as nearly impossible in reality. Tocqueville feared the tyranny of the majority. Nietzsche condemned it as the death of greatness. Marx exposed it as a mask for capitalist power, and Arendt warned that without constant, active participation, democracy dissolves into an empty shell. If we take their words seriously, democracy appears not as a self-evident truth or an unquestionable ideal, but as a problem, a contested and fragile experiment that can never be understood through slogans alone. Today, democracy is less a real political system and more a global slogan. It has become a magical word that every government wants to attach to its name. Just look at the titles of states: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and many others. The irony is obvious. Regimes with no trace of freedom or participation proudly call themselves democratic. This is what can be called political branding. In the modern world, democracy functions like a trademark or a logo. If you have it, you are legitimate. If you don't, you are branded, backward or authoritarian. The contradiction, however, is not only found in dictatorships. It lives at the heart of Western democracies as well. In every election, politicians cry out slogans such as saving democracy or restoring democracy, as if the word itself could magically heal economic or social crises. Media outlets reinforce the image of democracy as the final stage of history, as though no alternative could ever exist, and democracy is the ultimate unquestionable achievement of humanity. But peel back the mask, and modern democracy looks more like a ceremonial ritual than real rule by the people. Citizens cast their votes every few years, but almost immediately real power slips out of their reach. Decisions are made behind closed doors, shaped by forces that are never directly submitted to the people's will: giant corporations, monopolized media, lobbying groups, and entrenched security structures. Modern democracy has also acquired a kind of political sacredness. Few dare to question its legitimacy. To say democracy is insufficient often sounds like an attack on freedom, or even on humanity itself. Yet this is precisely the danger that philosophers long ago warned about. When a concept ceases to be questioned and is worshipped instead, it becomes the most dangerous illusion. On one side, democracy is still promoted as the great achievement of modern civilization. On the other, in practice, it has been reduced to a system of spectatorship and collective powerlessness. People believe they rule, but in reality, they watch while decisions are made elsewhere. So the question remains, do we actually live in democracy, or only in the image of democracy? Does this word point to a living truth, or merely to a mask worn by power to make itself appear flawless? Part 5: Freedom, Voting, and the Illusion of Choice. If you ask most people what democracy means, they will immediately give you three answers: freedom of speech, the right to vote, and the ability to choose. But are these three pillars really what we are told they are? Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is always presented as the hallmark of democracy. Yet when we look closely, it has never been absolute. In every society, there are legal restrictions, often tightened in the name of security or public order. More importantly, real freedom of speech depends on access to power and media. The one who owns the microphone can be heard by millions. The one without it may be free to speak, but their voice disappears into silence. In this sense, freedom of speech often resembles the freedom to write words in the sand. You are free, but the waves of power wash everything away. The right to vote. The second pillar is the right to vote. On the surface, every vote is equal, and every citizen has the power to shape their destiny. But in reality, voting usually means choosing among options that have already been filtered and approved by structures of power. You can choose, yes, but only from the menu offered to you. Even in societies where elections are more competitive, the cost of entering the field is so high, campaigns, financing, networks of influence, that many voices are excluded before the race even begins. What is called the right to vote often looks more like participating in a game whose rules and outcomes are already designed. The illusion of participation. The third pillar, popular participation, is perhaps the greatest illusion of all. Real participation requires the people's direct and ongoing presence in decision-making. But in modern democracy, the people's role is reduced to casting a ballot and then retreating to the sidelines. After the election, real power consolidates in institutions that are neither transparent nor accountable. What we call citizenship often amounts to what could better be called formal citizenship. Citizens appear free and equal in name, but in practice their role is decorative rather than sovereign. So when we look carefully, the three pillars of democracy, freedom of speech, the right to vote, and popular participation, turn out to be shadows of reality rather than its substance. We are free, but within boundaries set by power. We vote, but only among pre-selected options. We participate, but only in a ceremonial ritual designed more to display legitimacy than to realize true popular power. In this way, modern democracy is less a living reality than an image sold to us so that we feel like rulers, while in truth we remain spectators. Conclusion and the essential conditions of real democracy. Now that we have traced democracy through history, listened to the philosophers, and uncovered its modern distortions, one thing must be clear. Our critique of democracy is not a defense of other systems. Monarchy, oligarchy, authoritarianism, and ideological regimes are simply other faces of domination. None of them have been, nor will they ever be, the final answer for humanity. We will turn to them in the future as well. But today's democracy, despite all the slogans and sanctification, is less a truth than an image presented by power so that we feel like rulers while, in reality, we are often only spectators. If we wish to speak with philosophical honesty, three essential conditions must exist before we can call something real democracy. 1. Equal freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is real only when every human being, regardless of wealth or influence, has an equal chance to be heard. If the voice of a billionaire echoes 1,000 times louder than the voice of a worker, this is not freedom. It is the illusion of freedom. 2. Genuine choice. Democracy only exists when any worthy individual can enter politics without needing immense wealth, hidden networks of power, or prior approval from elites. If only those pre-selected by power can run, this is not choice. It is the performance of choice. 3. Continuous living participation. True democracy means citizens are present not just on election day, but in the ongoing decisions that shape their society. If people are summoned to the stage only once every few years, then spend the rest of their lives as spectators, this is not participation. It is a ritual designed to legitimize power. To make this concrete, let us look at the country most often held up as democracy's global model, the United States. Their freedom of speech is legally guaranteed, but the real megaphones belong to a handful of giant media corporations. The voice of an ordinary citizen, however profound, is drowned out next to the voices of wealth and politics. Voting is open, but in practice the competition is confined to two major parties. Smaller parties have virtually no chance, no matter how many millions might support them. And participation? Citizens cast ballots, but the decisive power rests with lobbies and institutions that are neither transparent nor directly accountable. In fact, the lobbying groups of Washington often shape policy more than millions of voters ever could. And perhaps, simply for saying this aloud in a video, even I may be questioned. This image reveals that even at the very heart of modern democracy, the three essential conditions of true democracy are absent. So we must confront the final question openly. Do we live in democracy, or in the illusion of democracy? Is this word a living truth, or only a mask worn by power? If it is the former, why can we not find its signs? And if it is the latter, then we must admit. Democracy today is less the rule of the people, and more the performance of the people to secure the rule of power.